Our moderator today is Peter Koropatwa. He works for Culture Connections, helping immigrants who settle in culturally diverse neighborhoods. He and his wife Rhonda love to live an active life with their 3 sons. He has a Bachelor of Science degree, a Master's degree in Apologetics, summa cum laude, and will be our moderator for this debate. So let's give Peter a big welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you at this invigorating time. I have with me Professor diCarlo on my left and Dave Hunt on my right. And I just want to introduce the speakers and the rules for this debate today. And I think we're going to have an insightful time as we dialogue on these important topics today. Dr. diCarlo is currently an instructor at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, where he teaches critical thinking and bioethics, as well as other courses. He's received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Waterloo, and he and his wife have 2 sons, Jeremy and Maddie, I believe. And Linda is his wife, and we're glad that he's here. He's written a book called The Comparative Brain, The Evolution of Human Reasoning and the Evolution of Religion, Why Many Need to Believe in Deities, Demons, and the Unseen. His latest book is entitled How to Become a Really Good Pain, a practical guide to thinking critically, and he has written papers on bioethics and cognitive evolution. And then we have Dave Hunt. He received a degree in mathematics from UCLA. He and his wife Ruth have 4 children. Dave launched a career in CPA and as a management consultant, and then later in the management of several corporations. His radio program is broadcast over 350 stations. His books, translated into more than 50 languages, have sold 4 million copies. So that's our 2 debaters for today. And I have something in common with each of them. With Mr. diCarlo, a special interest in cross-cultural behavior and universal modes of reasoning. And with Mr. Hunt, an interest in science and the statistical probability related with prophecy. So each debater is encouraged to present their case in an atmosphere that is open, respectful, and spirited exchange that Canada embodies. Now, if the speakers go beyond their time limits, I do have a motivation for them to end their talk. It's a water pistol here. They each have 40 minutes to present their case, and then 15 minutes for rebuttal, and then a further rebuttal of 5 minutes. We will be taking questions and answers, and there are cards available at the back, and you can pick one up. If you, or maybe you've already thought of a question, we're going to receive these, and then I'll be presenting those questions to our speakers. So, Mr. Hunt, if you would present your case, we will listen attentively.
Okay, now I want to thank, as I did last night, first of all, Paul McGregor and the other conveners and sponsors of this series. I think it was a great idea. They ought to do it again. I want to thank the film crew and All Saints Catholic High School for renting out the facility. They're not the sponsors, they're not endorsing anything. Right from the start, as I said last night, I want to make it very clear. I'm not here to represent any religion, any church, not Protestantism, Catholicism, Lutherans, Presbyterians, anything, but biblical Christianity. And the reason I say biblical Christianity is because I've listened to a number of debates. Atheists generally lump you're religious, okay, and they lump you in, you know. Wow, those religious Muslims, they're killing people. Well, I guess Christians do that too. No, I'm only here to defend biblical Christianity as it is defined in the Bible and by Jesus Christ himself. Now, we've got a group today who call themselves the New Atheists. How many of you have heard of the New Atheists? Oh, a few, not many. Okay. Well, they very humbly call themselves the Brights. And that means the rest of us are dimwits. The unofficial leader of this movement, Richard Dawkins, declares that belief in God is not only stupid, but it is wicked, and it must be stamped out. Now, I don't know whether Christopher is one of the new atheists, subscribes to that or not, but we'll find out. They do not even want parents to be able to teach their children the faith that they believe. This kind of totalitarianism really gives me some concerns. In their hatred of God, as I mentioned, they lump every religion into one pot. Well, there are hundreds of religions that contradict one another. In his book, and I haven't read any of Christopher's books, in his book, God is Not Great, Christopher Hitchens, who's a bestseller on the New York Times list right now, he uses the word religion or religious hundreds of times. And the title, beginning with the subtitle of his book, How Religion Poisons Everything. That's a wild statement. I don't think it poisoned a lot of people who were very religious, but anyway, that's an overstatement typical of Hitchens and typical of some other atheists. Hitchens never distinguishes between religions. Islam promises paradise and reward. We have a debate on Islam tonight for murdering innocent people. I don't call them, what do they call them? They're suicide bombers. No, they're murderers. But we will have a discussion about that this evening, perhaps. But Islam gives you a reward in heaven. I don't know what kind of a God does that. Christianity doesn't do that, and there are plenty of other religions. In fact, I don't know of any other religion that promises a reward in heaven for killing innocent people. In damning religions and damning Christians for being religious, as they would call it, they seem unaware that this book, the Bible, I've got 1,300 pages here, it's not a religious book. It's not about religion. The word religion occurs 5 times, and the word religious 2 times in 1,300 pages. This book is not about religion. It's about a relationship with God that Jesus Christ brings us into through faith in Him and through His work upon the cross. Now, atheists claim, and again, we'll find out what Christopher, I don't want to lump all atheists in one pot, but they claim that one day science will have explained everything. Even consciousness, even morals. It will all be explained by science because atheism is materialistic. After all, if you don't believe in God, what do you have to work with? Well, you got matter. And every atheist that I've ever dealt with, this is what they are. They are materialists, scientific materialists, they would say. Now, I want to clarify some basic misunderstandings. Faith, first of all. I've listened to a few debates, Richard Dawkins and so forth, and their criticism reveals an inexcusable ignorance of what Christians at least really believe. Anybody that has faith, faith means you don't have evidence. And that's why they say it's a crime to teach your child. Well, you don't have to have any evidence. All you do is you just believe. You got a faith. I don't know any Christian who even believes that. That's not faith, according to the Bible, according to Christianity. Faith is without evidence? No. Faith is based on evidence. And they say, well, you're not to question anything, and you're not even to reason, or not even to understand anything. Well, I could give you dozens of verses, but I'll just give you 2 or 3. Isaiah 1:18, the God of the Bible says, "Come now and let us reason together." The Bible is all about reasoning. If you went to Proverbs 4:7, it says, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." God wants us to understand him. If we went to Jeremiah 9:24, God says, "Let him that glorieth," or boast in this, that he knoweth me. No, it's not what comes first. That he understandeth and knoweth me. Now, the God of Hinduism we heard about last night is, you can't understand him. He's beyond any understanding. The God of the Bible, believe it or not, wants us to understand him. He wants us to know him. He wants us to have a personal relationship with him. And you would find this all through the Bible. Now, one of the major problems that we have to deal with, I think it's a problem for the atheist, I don't believe it's a problem for Christians, is the problem of origins. Where does everything come from? Well, we have parents, so I guess that's our origin, and then they had parents and so forth, all the way back. But where did they come from? We need a rational explanation. We need to be able to reason about it. Well, the Christians say Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve needed an explanation. Where did they come from? Well, the Bible says God created them. Atheists say it was evolution. They evolved. Now, we've got a lot of problems with evolution. I don't think it's quite fair. I think it's a little bit dishonest. They're talking about, you can read many books on, like for example, Darwin's book, The Origin of the Species. Well, I think anybody who's read it will tell you he doesn't explain the origin of any species, because you can't. He just starts with species. And we're going to tell you how they evolved and so forth. But wait a minute. Everything's made of energy. Where did the energy come from? We don't know what energy is. We don't know what gravity is. We don't know what anything is. So I think what they're trying to do is build a structure without a foundation. I mean, what's the point of talking about how things evolve when you can't tell me where the energy that they're made of came from? And I don't think that's quite the way. I don't think they should take credit for explaining origins. Now, natural selection. Oh, of course, I believe in natural selection. But you got to have nature. You got to have something that you can select with. You have to have a reproductive organism before this will even work. Where are you going to get this reproductive organism? Consciousness, life. Life, that's a problem. But where does that come from? Well, they cannot explain it. Science has no answer to it. Let me quote Stephen Hawking, you probably all know him, the genius in the wheelchair. He asks, why does the universe go to all the trouble of existing? What is it for? Science has no answer to that. Scientists don't like the why question. That's out of bounds. There's no answer. Lee Smolin, a theoretical physicist not far from here, Waterloo, Canada, has said, quote, when a child asks, what is the world, we literally have nothing to say. Well, atheists say it began with a Big Bang. I think you got some big problems with the Big Bang. First of all, where did the energy come from? There are a lot of problems. The second law well, let's take the first law of thermodynamics. It says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Well, that's because they're atheists. It can't be created by anyone but God. But if it cannot be created, then it must have been here forever. This is the atheist God. energy. The atheist doesn't like you. Well, God. Well, what about God? Well, he created everything. Yeah, but who created God? We don't believe in created gods. We don't believe in a God that was created. Oh, well, he'd have to be created. Well, yeah, but you say that energy can't be created. So you believe in something that has no beginning. Why can't we believe that God has no beginning? You are driven to something or someone. Now, we've got a problem between the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Second law is the law of entropy. Well, if energy can not be created, then it had no beginning. It must have been here forever. The second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, says that energy runs down like a clock. Energy becomes less and less usable. Things move from order to disorder. Now that kind of disagrees with the Big Bang. That's the ultimate disorder, moving to order. But the second law says no, things move from order to disorder. Now if you can't create energy and energy's been here forever, it surely should have all gone, it should have all entropied by this time. Well, many scientists don't accept the Big Bang. Many of them that I could quote. What is energy? What's an electron? What's an atom? What is space? Time? Light? Gravity? We have words for these things, but we have no explanation for any of them. Max Planck, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, father of modern quantum theory, he said, quote, "Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature." Robert Jastrow, founder and for 20 years, the director of the NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies that launched Pioneer and so forth, he struggled for years to deny the distasteful evidence. An agnostic, he shocked many of his fellow scientists when he implied at the 144th National Conference of the Association for the Advancement of Science that the evidence seems to demand an intelligent creator. And while he remained an agnostic, he finally concluded, along with many of the top astronomers today, there was a beginning to the universe. You don't have to be a top astronomer to realize that. I mean, the sun hasn't been in the sky forever. You can explain that to a child. If it had been, it would have burned out by now. I mean, I don't care how big a fire is. Ultimately, it will burn out. The same is true of all the other stars. There had to be a time when they weren't there, or they would have burned out by now. So someone or something had to start them. But anyway, listen to how he describes the embarrassing moment when he and many other astronomers finally admitted, oh, there is a beginning to the universe. He said, I'm quoting him, "The scientist has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries." Why have they been sitting there for centuries? First three words in the Bible, in the beginning. Now you can't explain that except for the next word, God. The next two words, God created. So, atheists often say, and again, I don't know whether Christopher says that, but science proves God doesn't exist. He'd probably admit that there is no proof that God doesn't exist. But scientists say, well, it was science that led me into atheism. Well, but there's an awful lot of scientists who were atheists who, by science, were led into biblical Christianity. It's impossible to form the tiniest single cell by chance. Well, the atheist says, evolutionist says, we're not talking about chance, we're talking about natural selection. Yes, but as I already explained, you have to have a living, reproductive organism for natural selection to work. How are you going to get that? You've got to have the first cell. Let me just give you a few little mathematical statistics here. The probability of a single, now we're talking about chance. You've got nothing, and you've got to get all of these chemicals together to form a living cell. That has to happen by chance. It can't happen by natural selection, because natural selection has nothing to select from. Okay? Now, the probability of a single basic protein molecule arising at random is 1 chance in 1, followed by 43 zeros. But the first cell would have to it would have to have a cell that brought it into existence. A simple cell has thousands of complex protein molecules. It's nonsense to imagine that even one cell could come together by chance. Mycoplasma genitalium of bacteria has the smallest genome of any known self-replicating organism. 482 genes of 1,040 nucleotide base pairs for a total of 580,000 base pairs. The average size protein molecule coded for by these genes contains 347 amino acids. The probability, this is just mathematics. You can't argue with mathematics. Mathematics is the queen of the sciences, right? And this is just, you got to get so many things lined up in a certain order, and it's a mathematical problem. So the probability of random formation of one such protein molecule is 1 chance in 1 with 451 zeros after it. If the entire Earth were solid carbon, it would contain 1 followed by 50 zeros of carbon atoms. Thus, it would take 1 with 401 zeros times the carbon atoms in a solid carbon Earth to provide enough carbon molecules even to give this a try. Now, we got another problem. Something called the law of biogenesis. These are scientific laws. I think every scientist agrees with it. But if you're an atheist, you can't agree with this, because it leads to the conclusion that there must have been a supernatural creation. So atheists refuse to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm sure Christopher doesn't. In spite of the testimony of eyewitnesses, they declare in the name of science that all life on earth sprang spontaneously from dead matter. Let me quote George Wald, Harvard professor, Nobel Prize winner. Listen to what he says. The spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. You know why? Pasteur did away with that. They used to think spontaneous generation could happen, but sterilize it. You don't get anything out of there. Life doesn't come out of dead things. Ah, yes, says George Wald, Nobel Prize winner, Harvard professor. The only alternative is, he says, to believe in a single primary act of supernatural creation. There's no third position. So here we are. As a result, I believe of spontaneous generation. This is the stupidity to which the atheist scientist is driven. He just said it's impossible. We all believe in the law of biogenesis. We know that life only comes from life. But, I mean, if you accept that, you've got to believe in God. Well, we are not. Let me quote another evolutionary biologist, Richard Lewontin. He defiantly said, we are forced to create material explanations. Materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Ooh, that's a little bit of prejudice. They hate God. Even though all the evidence says, oh, God alone could do it, we will not allow a divine foot in the door. And I think they're beating a dead horse. Materialism is dead. And I have plenty of scientists who are not Christians who will tell you that. Ideas are not physical. Theories are not physical. We talked about that a little bit last night. If I said justice, you know what I mean. Well, tell me, how much does it weigh? What does it smell like? What's its texture? What does it sound like? What does it look like? Has nothing to do with any of the five senses that describe this universe. It is in another dimension. You could put it very simply, as a friend of mine does. Tissues do not know anything about issues. Tissues do not know anything about issues. So the atheist who says belief in a non-physical dimension is nonsense, I would just ask him, what is the physical description of nonsense? Well, nonsense is an idea, something you understand, but it's not physical. You can't explain that in material terms. A Nobel laureate physicist, Erwin Schrödinger, listen to what he said. The scientific picture of the real world around me is ghastly silent about all that really matters to us. It knows nothing of beautiful or ugly, good or bad, God and eternity. Whence came I? Whither go I? That is the great unfathomable question. Science has no answer to it. Well, science cannot answer life's most important questions because truth eludes scientific analysis. Now, the Bible challenges us. As thou knowest, I'm quoting from Ecclesiastes 11, verse 5, written by Solomon under the inspiration of God. As thou knowest not how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh all. The works of God are the secret to the development of a baby in the womb. It's an amazing story, allegedly without an author, that Dawkins admits. This is Richard Dawkins, a geneticist. He says, yeah, that's a tough one. It will probably take me and my fellow atheists centuries to understand it, if ever. Now, the Bible says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my thoughts higher than your thoughts. That's an interesting analogy, because what do we have? If we could fully, thoroughly understand our solar system, what would we know about the universe? Well, there are 200 billion solar systems in our galaxy, and there are 1 trillion galaxies in the universe, so they say. So if we knew everything about our solar system, we would know 1/200 billionth of 1 trillionth of the universe. It's a pretty small sample. I don't think that would fly anywhere. So God says the heavens are high. They're high above you. It's just like my thoughts, and I'm the creator over all of this, and that's why you're not going to find it out. Now, the problem of origins persists. Whatever you say, well, you got a difficulty there. You really have to have God. Dawkins says, oh, we're working on that. He says, you Christians, you don't have any motivation. It's just a cop-out. You say, God does it. But we scientists roll up our sleeves, and we go to work on this, and we're going to figure it out. Well, the heavens are high above the earth. They're not even going to figure out what the universe is. You know, the eye was a nightmare for Darwin. How are you going to have a developing eye? I was a freshman at UCLA, and he was teaching evolution, natural selection. I raised my hand. He's talking about the eye. I said, you just contradicted yourself. Natural selection. You say that natural selection works. It weeds out what won't work, and it gradually develops something. Well, any little particle, whatever it is of an eye that doesn't even work, you haven't got it all put together yet, natural selection would throw that out. You would never get to natural selection. It wouldn't help natural selection until it works. and you've got a long ways to go before it could work. Eyes of early trilobites, for example, they've never been exceeded for complexity, and this is one of, they say, one of the oldest critters there. The eye is not going to be able to function and help survival without a cornea, iris, pupil, macula, vitreous, rods and cones, 100 million light-sensitive cells that send information to the brain through 1 million fibers of the optic nerve. The brain itself, 100 billion nerve cells joined by some 240,000 miles of nerve fibers, and 100 trillion connections between nerve cells in the human brain. The brain has more electrical connections than all the electrical appliances on this earth. Yeah, but give us time, a few million years, natural selection will do it. I think it takes an awful lot of faith in evolution to believe in that. How the brain of the fetus develops in the womb, it's beyond present comprehension. As it grows, billions of neurons migrate along glial cells, which will eventually number as many as 5 trillion in their final destination. How the brain develops its astonishing connection to the eye through the optic nerve with its 1,200,000 fibers, how the 538 million cells in the visual cortex, 5 to 6 million cones, 120 to 140 million rods, all play their part in bringing a visual image to the brain, how the aqueous humor in the eye must be turned over 15 times a day, the essential blood supply to the retina constantly maintained through the central retinal artery, and so forth. I think David knew what he was talking about, Psalm 139. He said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I think take a creator. Richard Dawkins used the word architect, but he doesn't believe in an architect. So we got some problems with origins. What came first, chicken or egg? It's not a childish question. There are dozens like this that atheists cannot answer. C.S. Lewis, for example, commented, we're taught from childhood to notice how the perfect oak drops the acorn, and to forget that the acorn itself was dropped by a perfect oak. Where did the perfect oak come from that dropped the acorn? Well, that's a problem. It's a chicken, what came first, chicken or egg? There are so many of these problems. There are hundreds. Life is possible only if the DNA blueprint can be read and put into action by the complex machinery of living cells. But the cellular machinery synthesizes the DNA. So you can't have DNA without the machinery that synthesizes it, but you can't have the machinery without the DNA. Now, which came first? You figure that one out. The DNA guides in the production of proteins, but every step in that process absolutely requires proteins that are unique and extremely complex. Which came first? The proteins essential to the process, or the process that produces these proteins? I don't think science has any answer to that. The Christian has. God, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I think the whole thing has to come together at once. The cell can't be alive and functioning without all of its parts. But the parts can only exist all together within a functioning cell. Impossible for the parts to develop by themselves and so forth. Well, there are just many of these questions. The subject of origins, in my opinion, is a minefield for atheists. What came first, the chicken or the egg? No, that sounds simple. There's no life without enzymes, for example. They're not living, but there are no enzymes without life. Which came first? The life that creates the enzymes, or the enzymes that have to guide life? They had to both come into existence at the same time. I'm going to take too long on this, so I better move on. Biblical Christianity declares that Jesus Christ is God come as a man through a virgin birth. He didn't cease to be God. He'll never cease to be man. And John 1, verse 2, thereabouts says, all things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. And then it says, significantly, in him was life. There is no life without life. The law of biogenesis. Life comes from life. And the Bible tells you that life comes from God. He is the one who has life, and he's the one who originated. Well, speaking at the 1981 annual meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, anthropologist Edmund R. Leach told his audience, quote, missing links, I guess we're going to have a talk about evolution this afternoon, missing links in the sequence of fossil evidence were a worry to Darwin. He felt sure they would eventually turn up, but they are still missing and seem likely to remain so. Johns Hopkins University professor Stephen Stanley declared, the known fossil record fails to document a single example of phyletic evolution accomplishing a major morphologic transition and hence offers no evidence that the gradual model can be valid. Professor Herbert Nilsson, director of the Botanical Institute at Lund University, Sweden, declared, after 40 years of study, the fossil material is now so complete that the lack of transitional series cannot be explained as due to the scarcity of the material. The deficiencies are real. They will never be filled. Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist of the British Museum of Natural History, he was taken to task by a reader for not showing an example of intermediary forms, not one example, in a book that he had written. Here was his reply. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. Gould and the American Museum people say there are no transitional fossils. You say I should have at least showed a photo or something. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which I could make a watertight argument. What about DNA? DNA, oh my goodness, basis of all life. You got no life without DNA. DNA, as you must know, most of you I'm sure, it's in writing. This is the formula. This is the architect's plan. Now, Dawkins, who calls this the architect's plan, he says genes have no foresight. Now, you know, an architect can't just start out building a building without the plans. So the plans must have been there first. You got to have plans before you can construct a cell, very complex, and a human body. Look, here's information on this page. We all begin as a single cell about the size of a period at the end of a sentence. This is information. Information only comes from an intelligence. The paper and the ink did not get together and make up this information. Oh my goodness, I'm trying to talk too fast because I'm running out of time. The most well-known genius out there, Einstein. Einstein said matter cannot arrange itself into information. There's no information in matter. Where did this information come from? Instructions that are written out. It could only come from God. I think that's simple logic. I think that we are driven by logic and by science to believe in God. Now, Wilder Penfield, I wanted to quote another Canadian. He was called at one time the greatest living Canadian. He was a neurosurgeon, not too far from here in Montreal. He said that the brain is like a computer. It's programmed by something independent and outside of itself. What could be outside of itself? Oh, might be in the liver or a kidney or something. No, he's talking about another dimension. And to the end of his life, he was trying to find a scientific explanation for consciousness. No, you can't find a scientific explanation because that's materialistic and thoughts are not physical. We're not dealing with something that you can explain. The placebo effect, which I don't have to explain to you, you all know that. That's a staggering example of the power of mental states over the body. And I won't go ahead and explain that. Michael Polanyi, a brilliant man, he fled from Nazi Germany. He said, there is no explanation, no concept in science of consciousness, much less of conscience. And he said, for the scientific world to deny this central fact is not in the interest of truth. Cognitive scientist Steven Pinker, in How the Mind Works, he says the existence of first-person experience is not explainable by science. Sir John Eccles, Nobel Prize winner, I quoted him earlier, he said the brain is like a computer that a ghost can operate. And he believed that that ghost was you, non-physical person living inside of that body. I mentioned last night, and I'll mention it again. Why do we even talk about this? What is important about it? Because if you are a non-physical being, you must be to have non-physical ideas. A non-physical being living in a physical body, your physical body is subject to the laws of thermodynamics. That's running down. In fact, the DNA is running down. And we have scientific statistics for that. We're not going to last much longer. And just by the DNA, the second law of thermodynamics working on the DNA, we couldn't have been here as long as the atheists say, only as long as the Bible says. Well, when you die, hate to talk about that, not a pleasant topic, your body, second law of thermodynamics, your body succumbs to it, but not your soul and spirit, which are non-physical. The laws of physics and chemistry have no power over souls and spirits. You will continue to exist somewhere. Well, that's a good question. We'll talk more about that later. The Bible explains that. That's why Jesus Christ came to deliver us from the wrong place to go to. But you cannot explain it away that you will continue to exist long after the death of your body.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wish to thank the organizers, Paul McGregor, for inviting me here this afternoon. As well, I'd like to thank the Center for Inquiry for contacting me, Justin Trottier, and they have a booth as well outside if you want to stop by, as well as the Canadian Durham Region Humanists who contacted me as well. And they're looking for students to join their organizations and whatnot. So if you're wondering what a humanist is, what secularism is, what science and reason is about, and so on and so forth, you can speak to one of the representatives in the foyer. Now, I must state from the outset that my purpose today is not to intentionally offend the religious sensitivities of anyone here this afternoon. I know how personal and comforting religious beliefs can be to some of you. I'm a former Roman Catholic myself, and much of my immediate family still is. And I've made it a good part of my life's work to study why people do develop and practice religious beliefs. So I wish to clearly state that it's not my intention to cause mental anguish or distress to any theist, Christian or otherwise. However, having said that, I have been given the task of arguing against the existence of God, a very specific God, a Christian God, and this I intend to do quite convincingly. By now, it should be clear that the defining features of the proposed God I am to disprove have been described in some detail by Mr. Hunt. The usual tact by theists generally follow a pattern of finding naturalized and scientific explanations for life and meaning somehow lacking in some regard, as he mentioned science, evolutionary theory, and so on. And so what happens is there are gaps that appear in trying to understand why things are the way they are. And there's then the inevitable move from, a God to the God or our God or whatever, which would then fill in those gaps. So Mr. Hunt's references are to a biblical Christian God, and therefore I won't concern myself with Norse, ancient Greek, or Roman type gods. I'll just disprove his particular variety. So, now, I may not get around to addressing all of the problems I see with Mr. Hunt's definition of God, but I'm going to look at things like the limits of human knowledge, scriptural contradictions, the evolution of religion, scientific knowledge and epistemic responsibility, inherent tensions in Christian dogma, moral issues, and the differences between Christian and secular values, depending on how much time we have, of course. So, now, in talking about, say, the limitations of human knowledge, right, I will define for you now exactly what I am. I'm an agtheist. That's right. You may have heard it for the first time here. An agtheist. That is one who is atheistic in regards to all known and defined world religions, but an agnostic in regards to whether or not this universe came into being as a deliberate act of intention, because none of us knows that. And if you do, show me the money. I'd like to see it. I really would. But all world religions to date haven't been able to demonstrate to me that this universe was intended to come into existence as opposed to just being an accident. So I'm an agtheist, which is an unusual hybrid of atheism and agnosticism. So, all such religions, including Mr. Hunt's, are guilty of committing errors in human reasoning, which make their positions untenable at best, and untenable at least, and impossible at best. So I claim to be an agnostic when it comes to the intentionality or lack thereof of the universe, because quite frankly, we don't really know. I don't know. The universe could have just come into existence. It may have been intended. But even if it was intended, that's not to say his particular brand of a god is the one that brought it into existence. There are people who are called deists. They don't have a theology, they don't have a religion whatsoever. They just think there is some type of force, energy, whatever, brought the universe into existence, and it could care less about us. It doesn't care what goes on with us whatsoever. Right? I don't believe in deism. I don't believe in theism. I live my life as though such things don't exist, because I think it's more important to get on with the business of living and worrying about how we're going to treat each other without killing each other. So, now, what I think is going on here is, when it comes to constraints of knowledge, there seems to be what's known as a disjunctive plausibility. A disjunctive plausibility means either the universe was intended to come into existence or it was not. There's no third option, or fifth option, or 10th option. Either this universe that we now know a little bit about was intended to come into existence or it was not. Now, I live my life by taking that disjunct and just putting it off to the side, because it really doesn't matter to me whether or not it's one way or the other. It doesn't matter to me in the least. What matters to me is how we're going to get along and how we're going to make the world a better place. That's the most important thing. So, what Mr. Hunt and others do is they choose the one side of that disjunct. They say, yes, the universe was intended, and the intender was God. We'll call him G. And G equals, and then lots and lots and lots of definitions are given to defining what this G is. The more definitions Mr. Hunt and others give to defining G, the more likely it is for guys like me to come along and find inconsistencies and contradictions in what he is saying to show, no. I don't think you've been able to demonstrate that. So what I do is I just take that disjunct, universe was intended or not intended, I just put it off to the side, and I just worry about life as it is, and humanity and other species on this planet as well. So, When I say something like, I'm holding a pen in my hand, it is called a High Tech Point V7 by Pilot, who happened to sponsor my being here. I'm just kidding. So if I say I have a pen in my hand, what color is it? And you say, well, it's black and it has the silver thing. What we can do is we can use our senses, we can use this big, mushy gray matter in our brains, and we can come to some type of agreement as to what black means in terms of color, light reflection and refraction, and then we can come to some type of agreement. This is what I call small t truth. It's truth where we can say, boy, it's cold outside, or nice to see the sun, isn't it? It's that kind of truth. Oh, lovely dress you're wearing today. Oh, thank you. We can talk about these types of things at what I call the small t level of truth. When Mr. Hunt starts to talk about God, we're not talking about pens anymore. We're talking about matters that are beyond our senses, and that is precisely why science generally doesn't go there, because it can't. And it recognizes, as did Socrates, as did the ancient skeptics, over 2,000 years ago, that there is a divide between these types of information. I would love to be able to know that a God existed, and that he cared for me, and that when I died he had a special place for me, and all I have to do is follow the rules in that particular book, and everything will be okay. But I don't have that information. Certainly not like this, nor do you. You may believe you do, but when you enter the realm of what I call big T truth, you have now taken what Kierkegaard called a leap of faith. Now, faith, as they say, can move mountains, yes, but not really. Heavy machinery and explosives move mountains. That's what science does. That's how we've been able to develop our abilities to overcome obstacles, not to be mere sheep or be like children and worship certain types of beings from afar or whatnot. Science takes to task the ability to try to understand for ourselves and make the world a better place. Now, let's say Mr. Hunt has defined his God as a biblical understanding in terms of Christianity. Okay. One of the problems that I see with this is it's somewhat exclusionary. So that what happens with the Hindus, what happens with the Muslims, what happens with the spiritualists, what happens with so many of the other world religions, of which there are about 1,200 different types and varieties of world religions. Basically, what Mr. Hunt is saying is that the others kind of have it, but nowhere near to the level of information that he has. Now, when he speaks at the level of big T truth, and we want to compare his words to the words of a Hindu, a Muslim, a Jew, an Aboriginal, whomever, we no longer have the pen is black type of criteria. It doesn't exist anymore. It now becomes a matter of faith. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about things that we cannot possibly fathom because they lie outside of the realm of our ability to know any of this information. So then what are we really talking about? Well, it might be like me saying, Bugs Bunny is a really good actor. I love that guy. I'd love to meet him someday, Dude, Bugs Bunny doesn't exist. Like, really? He doesn't? No, he's just a cartoon. So if we're going to talk about different world religions, who's right, who's wrong, what criteria do we use to be able to say, the Jews got it? Okay, it's all over, everybody. The Jews have it. Christians, sorry, you're wrong. Muslims, terribly sorry. Good try, though, that whole Allah, Muhammad thing. It was cool. Wrong. Hindus, man, you guys really screwed up. I don't know what you were thinking. Aboriginals, savages, right? What were you thinking? So how would we be able to determine who was right when it comes to world religions? And the answer, of course, is we don't. We don't have the measuring stick. I wish we did. I really do. It'd be a vastly different world, wouldn't it? If we were to be able to open that book and every human on this planet looked at it, read it, and said, right, what was I thinking? There it is, of course. But then why are there 1,200 different world religions, if that's the truth? Why are the others so wrong? Why have they gotten it wrong? And why am I wrong? As an atheist, I just want to be a good person. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to be compassionate. I sometimes think I'm a better Christian than most Christians I know. Right? And I've seen some bad Christians, like George W. Bush. So, if you didn't think I was going to take a shot at him, you're crazy. Right? Now, very bad Christian. Very bad. Listen, it's an impossibility for all defined world religions to be right. It's impossible. They contradict each other. Monotheistic, one God. Polytheistic, many gods. Mr. Hunt, you believe in the Trinity? You do, okay. Some believe in the Trinity, some don't. Okay. Who's right? Mr. Hunt, right? Or not. So, for all of those who don't believe in the Trinity, wrong, sorry. Good try, though. But we have the revealed word here today. All defined world religions cannot be right, but they can all be wrong. Don't forget that. What is the epistemically responsible thing to do when we're faced with this plausible disjunct? That means, what's the right thing to do based on the information we have? Based on the fact that we have criteria at this level, at what I call the small t level of truth, and we have very little to no criteria at the big T level of truth, what's the responsible thing for us to do? Well, you can take a leap of faith if you want, but I think the responsible thing, if you do that, would be to say, I understand that I don't know that a God exists. I don't know that any of the words in that Bible are true. I don't even know if Christ himself existed. But you know what? I want to take this leap because it makes me feel good, or it's something I need in my world. I think those are the most mature theists that I know, people who recognize the possibility that they could be wrong, they could be just way off, but they like having those beliefs in their head. It makes them feel better. And, to tell you the truth, I'm perfectly tolerant of all world religions. I speak at the World Religions Conference. On occasion, I was the first atheist invited to their conference. So I'm tolerant of world religions. I know Richard Dawkins. I've met him. He's a friend of mine. He actually asked me to stop doing these types of debates. But I have my way of seeing the world, and Richard has his way of seeing the world. I don't mind. I don't care what you believe in. You could pray to goats for all I care. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is how you treat other people. And if your beliefs create any kind of divisiveness or hatred towards your fellow man, then you can hardly be considered good Christians. Would I be right in that respect? Okay. So as long as you have those beliefs, and I have the same beliefs without a God, then I think we're all getting along pretty well. You can pray for my immortal soul, do whatever you think is proper according to your religious beliefs, save me a spot in your heaven or whatever. And I'm just going to maintain that nothing is going to happen after I die. Do you remember what it was like 10 years before you were born? Do you remember what that was like? Yeah, well, that's what death is going to be like. Pretty much the same. So, was I complaining 10 years before I was born? No. Why? Because I wasn't around to complain. So it didn't seem to be too bad of a state then. I don't think death is going to be too bad of a state in the same way. So if it makes you feel good or whatnot to live your lives according to certain types of scriptures, and you don't cheat on your taxes, and you're not cruel to animals, and you're good civilians and that sort of thing, you're not breaking into my house to steal my TV to support your Christian habit, yeah, then I'm down with you, or Muslim or Jew or Hindu or whatever. Fine, go ahead, that's wonderful, and then we can all get along. Okay? Just don't think that I'm so wrong I need to be helped, or that something's wrong with me or my kids back there because they've been raised without being baptized or without any kind of God or whatnot. They seem to be fairly well-adapted kids. And, the lessons I've taught them are inherent in many of the world's religions. And we have to realize that there is a lot of good that does come out of world religions, no question about it. But there's also a lot of bad stuff as well, unfortunately. Some people take religion and use it as a tool of empowerment and harm others because of it. And that's the last thing we would want to say any religious person should be doing. But yet, it happens, and it's happening south of the border. I was born and raised, baptized, Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy for 5 years. I never, ever recalled in the New Testament where it said, "Go verily unto foreign lands and kill people for their oil." I missed that. So, religion can be abused, and we see it happen all the time. Different religions throughout the world. So, my first point is that we really need to understand how we are limited in our knowledge. You may think that you know for sure that Jesus Christ or Brahma or Muhammad or Allah or Vishnu or any of the various gods exist. You may think that you know this for sure, but you don't. You have a strong faith because the realm of your understanding is at the level of big T truth. And it's very difficult for us to demonstrate to everyone here that you have in your possession absolute truth. If you had it in the same way as you had it for this pen is black, it would be a vastly different world. Because there is that separation of knowledge. That's one of the reasons why we're here. Because we're having a discussion about the existence, or in my case, the non-existence of a Christian God. Now, Mr. Hunt, I believe, has multiplied entities far past necessity. This is known as a violation of Occam's razor. So what happens is he's chosen one of the sides of the disjunct, that the universe was indeed intended. Define that intender as a God, further define that God as a Christian God, as defined in Scripture. And I'm not sure if he's revealed himself to Mr. Hunt or not, but those are basically the ways you can find out about a particular God, is through Scripture and Revelation, that sort of thing. And when he does, what happens is he extends his understanding of God far past necessity. Some people may believe the universe was intended, but have no idea how or what could have done it, or how to understand what that thing is, or whatnot. So they just leave it. These are the deists, people who are deists. They say, yeah, I think there is something out there. I have no idea. I couldn't even begin to tell you what it is, but I'm not going to define it. I'm not going to follow a particular pattern. I'm just going to assume that this thing does exist. Anthony Flew, who was an atheist, is now a deist. He now looks at the universe and through science thinks that there was some type of creative element involved. But he's a deist. He doesn't believe in an afterlife. He doesn't believe in a God that loves him or says, you know, I want you to act this particular way. He thinks it's an uninterested deity out there somewhere that could care less what happens to us. So there are many ways in which we can try to understand, you know, what I call the big five, right? You know, what do we know? Why are we here? You know, how should we behave? What is to become of us? These are huge, huge questions that we need to think about. And philosophers and theologians have been thinking about these for years. Well, the answers lie in the realm of what I call big T, or absolute truth. And we have very little of this information. Mr. Hunt thinks he has it. Somebody else, an imam thinks he has it. A rabbi thinks he has it, and so on and so forth. Well, they can't all be right. It's impossible. It's contradictory for what they all believe to be right. It's impossible. But they can all be wrong. And so, as Mr. Hunt pointed out, there are flaws in evolutionary theory. There are flaws in science. Therefore, what must happen is we need to fill in those gaps with a type of God. Now it all makes sense, you see. It all makes sense. Mr. Hunt's very impatient. Okay? Should we go back to consuming unpasteurized foods then? Should we consider the world to be flat? Right? Should we consider that medical science and understanding the function of microbes, pathogens, and parasites, according to microbiological evolutionary theory, is something we need not worry about? MRSA, VRE, don't worry about it. Just pray enough and these things will go away. No, it's science and our understanding of how things work at certain levels that will allow us to hopefully make the world a better place for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. That is what science is about. It has similar approaches to humanity as many world religions do. It just doesn't need the God patting us on the back. Okay? Nor do any of the scientists I know trumpet, the glory of God is dead. It's not as though they're praying to, secular Friedrich Nietzsche and chanting God is dead in their off time. It doesn't work like that. Okay? You mentioned some problems with evolutionary theory, most of which I would call straw man attacks, which is essentially you've gotten it wrong. You've gotten much of the evolutionary theory wrong, and so what you are attacking is a misrepresentation of evolutionary theory. And that's a usual tact by theologians when they go after evolutionary theory. You might say I'm doing the same thing if we look at scriptural contradictions. The Lord is good to all. Apparently not. In Jeremiah, I will dash them one against another, even fathers and sons together, saith the Lord. I will not pity, nor spare, nor have mercy, but destroy them. This is a vengeful, wrathful, almost Mr. T type of God. I will pity them. I will not spare them. The Lord is a man of war. No, now God is one of peace. Be with you all. Amen. Is Jesus equal or lesser than? You believe in the Trinity. I and my Father are one. Right? No. Ye have heard now, I said unto you, I go away and come again unto you. If ye loved me, ye would rejoice, because I said, I go unto the Father, for my Father is greater than I. Right? The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree. The righteous perish, and no man layeth it to heart. Can God be seen? God, yes, he can in Exodus, yes. But in John, no man hath seen God at any time. Very elusive, very interesting. Ascending to heaven. Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, 2 Kings 11. No man hath ascended up to heaven. Okay, power of God. With God all things are powerful. Matthew 19:26. No, the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. Judges 1:19. There are many more on punishing crime, on family relationships, on the resurrection of the dead. God is satisfied with his works. God is dissatisfied with his works, both in Genesis. God dwells in chosen temples. God dwells not in temples. In light, no, in darkness. God is seen. God is not seen. God is tired and rests. God is never tired and never rests. God is everywhere present. God is not everywhere present. Neither sees nor knows all things. Genesis, not too many verses apart. God is all-powerful. Matthew 19:26, God is not all-powerful. Judges 1:19. God is the author of evil. God is not the author of evil. God is to be found by those who seek him. God is not to be found by those who seek him. Proverbs and Matthew. Okay? God is cruel, unmerciful, destructive. God is kind, merciful, good. God is a lot of things to a lot of people here. God accepts human sacrifices. God forbids human sacrifices. Deuteronomy 12:30 and 31. Because of man's wickedness, God destroys him. Because of man's wickedness, God will not destroy him. Both in Genesis. There is but one God. Deuteronomy 6:4. There is a plurality of gods. Genesis 3:22. John 5:7. And now let's talk about killing. Since I mentioned Mr. Bush, south of the border. You shall not kill. Divine commandment, Exodus 20:13. Down comes Moses from the mountain. What does he do? Well, basically, he leads his people out of Egypt, and then he leads them on what can only be described as a blood-soaked trek to the promised land. We are told, for example, that when God delivered the land of Heshbon to the Hebrews, they utterly destroyed every city, men, women, and children. They left none remaining. In a case where we might be tempted to think the extent of killing was an excess brought about by the heat of battle, say, rather than by divinely sanctioned slaughter, we read in Numbers of a case in which Moses angrily chastises the army generals for not killing all of the inhabitants of a city. In their defeat of the Midianites, the Hebrews took as captives the women and children after slaying all the men. Moses was, we're told, was angry with the officers of the army. And he asked, have you let all the women live? Numbers 30, 14, 15. He corrects their error by basically saying to them, listen, now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Right. Yeah. I don't know how selective you're going to be of that book, but if somebody were to do this today, you might think there's something morally deficient about this person. They ought not to kill children. They ought not to kill, period. But apparently it's okay if it's for a divine cause, which, as we all know, is the ugliest side of religious belief. When hatred and bigotry and divisiveness come to the point where you are justified in killing your fellow man, we've got a serious problem. And here we have the superstar of the Old Testament basically saying, yeah, not only is it okay to kill children and men, but kill all women who have had sex. And those who haven't, the virgins, guess what? Today's your lucky day. We might think of that as, abhorrent. But yet, there it is, Numbers 30, 17 to 19. Now, when I do my studying of religion as an academic, I generally see it as being an explanation for causal forces in nature. This is why I believe all religions came to be invented. And I say invented because I don't think any of them are right. I think they're all wrong. So equally, Christianity with Islam, with Hindu, you're all wrong. You're collectively just wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You just got it wrong. So how did you come to be so wrong? Well, because your ancestors looked at the world and needed an explanation for causal forces in nature. Secondly, they needed a guide for moral behavior. This world is a very violent place. I don't know how much world traveling you folks do, but you go outside of Canada to any 50 or 60 different countries around the world, it's a lot different than this place. We are a very violent species. Predominantly men. Why? Testosterone. Yeah. In biology, men, no offense, you're an afterthought. Okay? Women hold all the cards in biology. They are the ones who give birth. They are the ones who care for the young. At best, you guys are good for a little bit of sex and taking out the trash when necessary. Okay? And if you can find some food somewhere, that would be a big help. But essentially, you're pretty useless. In fact, there are some species that don't have males at all. They don't need them. Whiptail lizards in Arizona. Females clone themselves. They've developed to the point where, just don't need them. So there are no males. That's how useless you guys are. And yet, you're responsible for world domination. You want to know why? Look at your testosterone. You're bigger than females. We are a dimorphic species. That means the average male is bigger and more muscular than females, which means what? Which means there's going to be an immediate power struggle within our particular species, which means what? Which means females get to give birth, lucky you, and we have to do something, so we're going to hunt or forage or do whatever is necessary to continue the propagation of our species. And if we do it well enough, we get to succeed. We get to survive and reproduce. Now, never forget that the two macro programs for all biological species, whether you are an amoeba, a fern, or a human being, are always the same. You got to have sex, and you got to survive. If you decide not to have sex, that's fine. If we all decide that collectively, fine. But we take ourselves out in a single generation. So we are no different from other species, and please do not tell me that sex is an original sin. It is not. It is perfectly necessary to our species just as it is to every other species, and it just so happens, non-coincidentally, to be a heck of a lot of fun. So, if you're wondering why that's the case, as Eddie Vedder said from Pearl Jam, It's evolution, baby. And that's why we're all here. We needed a guide for moral behavior, and we needed an explanation about death. At one point in our ancestors' past, we have no indication of burials. I better check with this right now. How old is the universe? Do you believe? Yeah. You're not doing the 6,000 year thing, are you?
It depends whether you're talking about time out there or time on this earth. But
Just the
I believe
whole...
that man has been here about 6,000 years.
Right, okay. So Dave's wrong. Okay? And I make no bones about that. He is wrong, wrong, wrong. I mean, we can be warm and fuzzy about this. You could be right, I could be right. No, I'm right and you're wrong.
No, I'm right and you're wrong.
Well... Maybe we'll have to have a water gun fight to settle this. I don't know. But look, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. We speciated with chimpanzees about 6 million years ago. We've been around from a long, long time. Thank you. Thank you. My simian brothers. Bananas for everybody after the debate. Okay. Listen. When we descended from the trees after Africa dried up about 6 million years ago because North and South America attached, yes, that's right, you do believe continents move, or do you think that's just something God's playing with your heads with? When North and South America joined, it stopped the Atlantic from flowing into the Pacific. This changed the climate in northern Africa, turned what was then a rainforest into what eventually became the Sahara. What happened was trees started to dry up and die. That meant our ancestors had to get moving or they had to die, adapt or perish. They came down from the trees, lots of tall grass. They stood up. They had 4 arms to be able to manipulate tools. They moved around. They ate lots of meat. They got big brains and shorter guts. Their pharyngeal development changed, which allowed language and the development of consciousness. This all happened on an afternoon. No, it didn't. That's not how evolution works. Evolution takes a long time, a lot longer than 6,000 years, millions of years. They didn't just come down from the trees, oh yeah, I'm liking this. Lion, and then they can run away because they can now see. No, evolution doesn't work like that. Evolution takes a long, long, long time. So they come down from the trees and they lope around for, I don't know, several 100,000 years before they develop the adaptations that allow them to gradually stand upright and move about from tree to tree and be able to forage and scavenge and eventually make tools. The techniques science has developed for determining the age of our planet and this universe cannot be denied. If you deny what science has given you, because that book says something else and you feel that you got to chuck the baby out with the bathwater, that you think, I can't believe this scientific evidence because it contradicts what I have in this particular book, you're missing out on a magnificent world that we have been able to understand through reason and science and mathematics. It is an amazing world with or without any kind of God, because we have evolved consciousness and language that have allowed us to be able to look up and ask the big 5 questions, and then to be able to separate truth into small t truth, the pen is black, and big T truth, why am I here? And I think that's a marvelous testament to us as a species. We stand alone in doing that. Do you realize that just about 30,000 years ago, even less than that, although that's 5 times the length of the Earth for Mr. Hunt, there were 4 different species of humans on this planet. Homo florenziensis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and Homo neanderthalis. They all existed at the same time. We are the only ones that survived. We have the big brains. We are sapient. That means we understand what's going on in our environments. We can manipulate tools. We can create technologies. If we didn't develop consciousness and language, we're not having this debate here today. There's no question in my mind about that. So what happened? Well, we looked around the world. We tried to make sense of it. We tried to survive and reproduce as best we could. Some of our brethren didn't make it. No Florenziensis, no Neanderthal, no Erectus. They didn't make it. Nor did Habilis, Heidelbergensis, all of those. Okay? Some of them speciated into others, and some of them died off. But we made it. And because we made it, we have the ability to look back upon ourselves and try to find out, how do we get here? And we can look at the fossils, and we can develop techniques that allow us to understand what was going on at a particular time period. So, what was happening? Our ancestors began to develop consciousness and language simultaneously, the coevolution of consciousness and language. They started to see activities going on in nature and be able to understand them in ways they could no longer understand them prior to those events happening. This changed them forever. In trying to make more understanding of what's going on in their world, they developed symbolic representation. By about 70,000 years ago, we start to see the first ritual burials of hominid ancestors. Prior to that, they left you where you died. And that was it. So what does that mean? That means our ancestors got a taste of mortality. This is something I refer to as caveman angst, which is essentially that ability to say, oh crap, that's me, and I'm going to be like that soon. And he's not moving, and he's full of bugs, and he smells bad, and he's never waking up again. And someday that's going to be me. Never underestimate how powerful the fear of death is. You think I'm looking forward to it? What are you, nuts? I don't want this party to end. I'd prefer there to be an afterlife, but I'm not counting on it. Just as I don't recall anything before my birth, I don't think I'm going to recall anything after my death. And that means it makes this world all the more important to each and every one of us. And that means each and every one of us has a duty to ourselves, to our community, especially to our children, to find out the truth insofar as we can understand it to the best of our ability at this level first. Okay? Let's work about the earth here below before we start to ascend towards what we believe are the heavens above. Thank you. I don't need any more time.
Isaac Newton wrote more about the Bible than he did about science, and yet he's called one of the greatest scientists. You want to talk about scientists today, I think astronauts are scientists. The first group of astronauts, I think it was Apollo 8, to circle the Earth, they said, we have a message for you folks back there on planet Earth. And they read the first 10 chapters of Genesis that start, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. They must have had that faith. You want to know the first food and drink that was consumed on the moon? It was the bread and wine for communion that was brought up there. Okay, they must have believed something that Christopher claims is beyond the capacity of us to believe. Now, he talks about taking a leap of faith. I don't believe in a leap of faith. He talked about the God of the gaps. The God of the gaps is whatever science can't explain. Then we say that must have been what how God did it. And the God of the gaps, of course, disappears as science advances. I don't believe, I don't come to the conclusion that God exists because there are some gaps in our knowledge. Alan Bloom, I quoted him last night, I think, University of Chicago philosophy professor. He wrote that very interesting book. I'd recommend you read it if you haven't. It's called The Closing of the American Mind. Where did the title come from? Those of you who were here last night, maybe if you remember, he said, in America, we're open to everything. We wouldn't fault anything. Christopher is open to all religions. No, he's not going to complain about them. Oh, he's very broad-minded. Okay. But Alan Bloom said we've become so open to everything that our minds have become closed to the possibility something might be right and something else wrong. Now we need a little more evidence. He hasn't given us any evidence. 70,000 years ago, a million years ago. How do they know? Big Bang, they weren't there. I want to know, maybe he will, but very limited time. I sympathize with him, because I have very limited time to produce evidence. But one of the things that I mentioned, he said, well, we're going to make a better world. That's humanism, of course, because he believes that this world is all there is. Matter is all there is. This material universe, he must be a materialist. Are you going to get into a non-physical dimension? God is a spirit, the Bible says. Now you're getting in trouble there. But I've explained that ideas are not physical. You cannot explain everything in physical terms. Physical science, he admits, has no answers, but he's giving us all a terrific story without one shred of evidence. Well, I said the Bible says that man's been here about 6,000 years. Well, he laughs at that, poo-poos that. Millions of years, of course, or hundreds of thousands of years for man and millions of years for everything else. Well, let me try to give you just a little bit of evidence. I gave some evidence last night. Why do I believe the Bible? Because of prophecy. Oh no, somebody's laughing. Prophecy. I'm not talking about cheap psychic predictions. I'm talking about history-making, earth-shaking events, foretold thousands of years before they happened. And I gave you a list of them last night. I just give you a quick list of them. They cannot be refuted. Let's go to Joel chapter 3, verse 2. God says, in the last days, I am going to bring all the nations to Jerusalem, and I'm going to punish them. Now he talked about, there's some tough things that he talked about, killing the Canaanites and so forth. But if you go to Genesis, and I can't deal with this entirely, but if you go to Genesis 15, God is promising his people the promised land. But he says, I can't give it to you yet, because the inhabitants are not so evil that I would be justified in wiping them out. 400 years from now, they will be that evil. And then I will use you to deliver this earth from them, because that's how evil they are. And I can't explain that, but I'll say that I'll leave that with God. But God doesn't just willy-nilly wipe out people. That's not the God of the Bible. He's given us all kinds of contradictions in the Bible. I wrote a book called In Defense of the Faith, where I deal with many of these, but I don't have the way of dealing with them this evening. But let's take Joel chapter 3, verse 2. God said, God, there is punishment. I know that Christopher has some children. I think 2 of them. Yeah. My wife and I have 4 and 10 grandchildren. You know what you learn about children? Our youngest son, the very first words that he could speak, the first word was no. And when he was growing up as a little boy, what have you been doing with your friend next door? We've been playing Stomp the Little People. And when you ask him, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a villain. Wow. Well, he turned out to be a very wonderful father and husband. He's an electrical engineer today. But anyway, we learn that human beings have a will of their own. God gave us the power of choice because he wants to express his love to us, and he wants us to love him in return. And you cannot love anyone. There's no love without heart. I'm tempted to mention, I was in Canada a few years ago, speaking at a conference, came home very late, into my hotel room very late, and I turned on the TV just to watch it, to see what news there might have been for the day. And I was riveted to the TV. There was an interview of a Canadian on Canadian television. He had been working in Saudi Arabia, and he had been falsely accused of terrorism. They tortured him. They're not interested in truth. All they wanted was to get him to say the words, just to confess. He said he learned two things, and I think you'll never forget this. Number one, I don't care how strong you are, they can make you hurt so bad, you will confess to anything. You will confess you killed your mother. You'll confess you killed God. Number two, he said, I learned something else. They cannot make you believe it. He said he was not a Christian. There is a place inside that no one can violate. That's your integrity. That's, the Bible calls it your heart. They cannot make you believe it. God can't make you believe anything. Why is the world like this? Because God has given us the power of choice. And he can't, even God cannot make you behave any more than you can make your child behave. There has to be a willingness on their part. And how that willingness comes about through Jesus Christ is another question. But Joel 3, verse 2, I'm going to bring all the nations to Jerusalem, God says, in the last days, and I'm going to punish them. Oh, punishment. I mean, what do you mean by punishment? I mentioned last night, I think, that I wrote the autobiography, or the ghostwriter of an autobiography, of the man who was the head of the Federal Parole Board in the United States. One of the things he learned is these people that come before you wanting parole, they will promise anything. Oh, they'll blubber and, oh, I'll never do it again. And you let them out and they come back and do it again. There must be some willingness, some change in the heart. And that, I believe, only comes about through Jesus Christ. So there's going to be punishment. You're not going to get away from that. And Christopher says, well, when he's dead, he's dead. Well, the Bible says it's appointed unto man once to die. After this, the judgment. Now, why do I believe the Bible? Because of prophecy. God says, I'm going to bring all the nations of this earth back to Jerusalem, and I'm going to punish them for two things. Number one, they scattered my people everywhere. Well, did it happen? Yes. God said, I will scatter you because of your sin. But he doesn't just do it himself. People do it. He's telling you what they're going to do. Then the second thing he said was, because they have divided my land. Well, Israel had many enemies. They never divided his land. Israel's been conquered many times. A conqueror doesn't divide the land. It keeps it for himself. Today, for the first time in our life, UN Resolution 181, it is called the dividing of the land. And the nations of this world joined together to divide the land of Israel. They left Israel with 13% of it. They gave the rest of it to the Arabs. But Britain had the commission. They were supposed to see that the Jews recovered their homeland, and they betrayed the Jews and so forth. They betrayed their trust. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 2. In the last days, God says, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all the nations round about. Why would Jerusalem be a cup of trembling? Because they want to destroy. Islam teaches Israel must be destroyed. And this little tiny group of people, outnumbered several hundred to one, they have technology. They could wipe out the Arabs, and they've acted with great restraint. Maybe you don't like me to say that. We'll say more about it tonight. Why is it a cup of trembling? Because all of these hundreds of thousands, millions of Arabs cannot defeat this little tiny nation of 6 million Jews. Wow, that's amazing. God said, I will make Jerusalem a terror to these nations round about them. They can launch multi-warheaded missiles, nuclear missiles from submarines. I mean, their technology, I'm going to run out of time here before I get to more prophecies. But God says they will be united against Jerusalem. They were never united before. They had different gods. They had different religions. They fought one another and killed one another. Today, for the first time, every nation surrounding Jerusalem is united. God said, I will make Jerusalem, and Israel he's talking about, a burden to all the nations of this world. Well, you have to have an organization of nations. We've got the United Nations. Is Israel a burden to the United Nations? Well, it certainly is. They've spent 1/3 of their time debating, pronouncing, condemning on Israel. I don't think you can explain that by chance. A nation that has 1/1000th of the Earth's population, they spent 1/3 of their time. God said, Israel will not be accounted among the nations. Well, Israel can't be a member of the Security Council. Every other nation in the world is allowed. They can't even be, they've been members for a long time of the UN. They're not allowed to be a member of the Human Rights Commission. You've got terrorist nations. You've got horrible, Human Rights Commission, the only democracy in the Middle East is not allowed. God said, they're not going to count you among the nations. Okay? Thank you very much. I think these are fulfillments of prophecy.
Okay. In response to some of the things Mr. Hunt has said, he said the Bible is all about reasoning and understanding. God wants us to understand Him, makes us better, reveals Himself, and so on and so forth. Obviously, I have a few problems with that, because if God wants this and He puts it forth in that particular book, I'm just wondering which version of that book do we go by? Do we try to get the oldest version? Do we get revised versions of it? King James? At what point, do we decide, okay, for biblical exegesis, this is the one that everybody should use? So first of all, we have trouble deciding on that alone. Then secondly, which interpretation of those scriptures do we go by? Like, let's face it, we have Catholics, we have Presbyterians, Unitarians, Anglicans, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and then we have quite a few different sects which parse off of those. Then we have New Age Christians. Then we have so many different ways you can interpret that thing. I'm just wondering who's right, and apparently it's Mr. Hunt, because that would mean everybody else is wrong, or they just haven't come around to his way of thinking yet. So that's going to present a huge obstacle for even Christians, I think, to come on board about a particular interpretation of scriptures, even a singular passage. Like, I don't know if there are Jehovah's Witnesses here, but they don't believe in using blood product. Well, if you look at why, and you look at the passages in the Bible, you would literally say, what? You got that from that? Really? Wow, I don't. I just don't see it. So if we can disagree about things that affect the way in which they live and would have affect their own children by allowing them to die without receiving any blood, and all it would take would, say, be 4 units of blood, that's pretty powerful. Now we are going beyond just being warm and fuzzy and tolerant and allowing this and allowing that. And what Mr. Hunt did to my argument was, again, another example of what's called a straw man. He took what I said, he misinterpreted it, and then he attacked the misinterpretation of it. I said I was tolerant of various religions, provided that you don't harm anybody. What's rule 1 in my world? Don't be an okay? That's rule 1. What does that mean? You can't harm others. What does that make George W. Bush? A really big one. Okay? Because he's harming others. So, when I say I'm tolerant of other world religions, that's provided you abide by that one major rule that we have as a species. Through your beliefs, you cannot harm others. So in that respect, yes, I am tolerant, but not so tolerant I embrace nothing, or I wouldn't be here today and I wouldn't be living my life a particular way and sharing those beliefs to my children, the 2 people I care most about in my life. And I'm sure you all feel the same way about your children as well. So let's get these facts straight, and let's be fair about what we're discussing here. As for his comments about Darwinian or evolutionary theory, that Darwin really didn't talk about the origin of species at all, because there had to be stuff here to begin with. He didn't talk about origins and whatnot. You're exactly right. And Darwin himself said, nor will I ever talk about biochemical evolution. That's something for biochemists and biochemical engineers to worry about. He dealt with speciation from observed species throughout time. That's what he was on about, and that he did an unsurpassed, amazing job, and given, I think, one of the greatest gifts to all of humanity by demonstrating our origins coming from Africa. Now, if you're wondering about things like, well, where did the stuff come from, this primordial soup, and how did life begin in such small matters, well, I urge you to go online, and I for one example, please look up the Origins of Life program at Harvard University. That's where I did my postdoc. And they are now conducting research, as is Cornell, as is Cambridge University, as is UCLA and other places. They're looking for origins of life, and they will come up with it, you can bet. So it's just a matter of time. So don't think, just because we haven't figured it out yet, where everything came from in the first phases of biochemical engineering, that we have to chuck all of evolution out just because we couldn't get to that particular starting point. That is what is being worked on right now, and you can bet whichever team, whichever university figures that out first, they're the ones who are going to get the Nobel Prize, right? Now, Mr. Hunt talked about the immensity of the universe with all these planets and stars and galaxies, millions and trillions and billions of stars and planets and galaxies all throughout this incredibly immense universe, and us on this insignificant little planet, us feeble beings who can barely get through a single day. God has made his divine creation, us. He did a really lousy job. We could be so much better, so much better. I mean, just the idea of the appendix alone, I mean, what's up with that? What is that, a joke? Really, much better job. The blind spot, because of the way the optic nerve goes through the passage in the skull. Why is it there? I'd rather have, you ever see those lizards with the 180 rotating eyes? They can see this way and that. Wouldn't that be great? Right? You could just walk along, see ya, hide and seek. You'd be amazing at that, right? So why didn't he give us eyes like that? Or just make us better in the first place, I think, would have been a good idea. So we're incredibly weak, susceptible to disease, parasites and pathogens, and all sorts of other things that afflict us. I gotta tell you, I've been writing down so much, I either feel like a kid in a candy store or a virgin on his honeymoon. I don't know where to begin first here. There's just so much I want to talk about. Let's go with, free will. That's one of my favorites. Mr. Hunt talked about the child saying no. Was it your grandchild? Son saying no. And he turned out to be a decent kid and father and husband and whatnot. His first word. Interestingly enough, Jeremy, my first son's first word was Nietzsche. No, it wasn't. I'm just kidding. But I think it was Dad, and Matt's first word was Mom. Now, God gave us choice and God gave us free will so that we could understand his love for us and our love for him. So he cannot make you behave. This has to be a willingness on your behalf. So basically it works like this. You have a particular being, God. Your God, we'll call him God, the Christian God, and he creates you in a particular way. Are you down with the Garden of Eden thing, Mr. Hunt?
Am I what?
Do you believe in the Garden of Eden?
I do.
Adam and Eve, first people?
Absolutely.
Okay. Something you might want to consider, folks, when you're just sitting around having coffee, shooting the breeze or whatnot, ask yourselves whether Adam and Eve had navels. Just something to think about. Okay? Just throwing that one out there. Because this was a major problem during medieval times when they were painting depictions of the Garden of Eden. Do we put why would they have navels? It was a tough one. So it's something you got to think about, right? Anyhow, we go back to the Garden of Eden, and God creates Adam and Eve, and he gives them free will. And he says, you know what? This is paradise, this is fine, this is wonderful. I don't want you to eat from this particular tree. If that's okay with you, just stay away from the tree. You can do anything else you want, okay? But eventually we know where the story goes, right? We know Eve listened to the serpent, and the serpent convinced her to convince Adam to eat this particular fruit, and then God comes along and says, well, what did I tell you? Get out of here. What's wrong with you? I give you all this, and then this is how you behave, okay? I got a little thought experiment for you, okay? In my spare time, I'm a roboticist. I create robots, and I'm really good at it. I created robots that were incredibly lifelike. I named them Hannah and Steve. And these are very intelligent robots. And I allow them to go out into my garden, in my backyard. And I say to them, you can do anything you want in this garden. Don't leave the premises, okay? But you can do anything while you're here. Just don't eat the mangoes off my mango tree. I really like the mango. Gotta love the mango. So don't eat my mangoes, okay? And they've said yes, they would not eat my mangoes. And I said, good. But I program these robots to love mangoes and to be naturally inquisitive. And I not only did that, but I know the exact time and date at which they are going to defy my instructions. Now, when they do, and I know they're going to eat these mangoes, should I be angry at them? Should I kick them out of my garden? Should I damn them for all time until I can produce a part of me to go back down onto earth to allow some kind of forgiveness to happen? No, I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't be shocked. Nor should I punish them. Because if you believe in the Garden of Eden, if you believe in the existence of Adam and Eve, you're believing in a fairy tale which never really happened. And if you do believe it happened, explain this. If God knew, long before he ever created them, what was going to happen to them, why did he do it? Right? Why did he do it? Dave, what's your favorite color?
I don't have one.
What's your favorite number?
I don't have one.
What's your favorite verse in the Bible?
Oh, lots of them.
Just give me one.
Okay. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have
John
everlasting
3:16?
life.
Okay, so what would have happened several billion years ago is if God is omniscient, meaning he knows all, which is how Christians tend to define God, then he would have known at this exact time that Mr. Hunt was going to quote that passage. Now, if God knew that a billion years ago, just how free was Mr. Hunt to have chosen another passage? And the answer is pretty obvious. It looks like he has freedom from where he's sitting. But where God's sitting, nah. He's up there saying, hey, St. Mike, watch this, watch. John 3:16, pay up. Right? Because he knows everything. And if you define a God as knowing everything, free will goes out that window. So, you've got some work to do as Christians. You better think about how it is you're going to have an all-knowing God who somehow allows you to have free will. Look at it another way. I don't want to ruin the movie, so I'm going to pick an old one. So I'm going to pick Jaws. Dun 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 dun. Okay, we all remember the shark. If you have seen the movie Jaws, not the bad sequels that follow, let's forget they ever existed, okay? But the original Steven Spielberg movie Jaws, okay? If you have seen it, you know what happens at the end. Can anybody tell me what happens to the shark at the end? It explodes because the chief of police, Brody, unfortunately Roy Scheider just died. Great actor, wonderful, wonderful guy. He throws an aqualung, a pressurized tank, into the mouth of the shark and then shoots it with a gun, which blows it up and blows the shark up. Now, if you were to rent the movie Jaws, and you're to take it home, and you're to watch it, and at the end it spits this thing out and eats the chief of police, whoa! Where'd that come from? You would be quite surprised. If you've seen the movie before, you know how it ends. The shark dies. I hope I'm not giving anything away here. But the shark doesn't make it. You watching the movie Jaws, it's like God watching your lives. It's like a DVD. Doesn't matter. You think you've got freedom, the shark's always going to die. He's always going to quote the same passage from the Bible. You can't get away from it. So, you've got some homework to do. You've got to think, okay, I believe that this God exists. Mr. Hunt told me he's given me free will so I can choose good and evil. It looks like you can, but you can't. Not according to God. Now ask yourselves this. Why would an omnibenevolent, all-good, superior, supreme being create beings to come into existence knowing some of them are going to fail and have them suffer forevermore? Doesn't that sound like a maniacal, almost evil being? There is no free will, sir. Obviously you weren't listening. If you have a God that is omniscient and knows everything, free will goes out the window. Let's look at, I guess, the number of types of gods we could choose versus the Christian biblical version. Why don't we do that? Okay, let's do that. So, what do we have here? We have the possibility of defining God in many, many, many ways. Tons of ways. You can define God as being monotheistic, just one God. Polytheistic, many gods. You can come up with hybrids. He's mono and poly, which is the idea of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Many different ways of defining God. As we noticed with Antony Flew, who is now no longer an atheist, but a deist, there's another way of defining God. That it's an uninterested, disinterested type of God who caused everything to come into existence, and now we're basically on our own. There's no afterlife. For whatever reason, it decided to bring everything into existence, and so there you have it. Why not, say, a continuum of gods, right? A council, like the Q continuum in Star Trek. Lots of different gods making decisions about what goes on, right? Why aren't one of you God? Mr. Hunt could be God. He's just deluded himself to not recognize that in fact he is God, made himself mortal to come back down here to argue for his own existence. And when he has proven it, he will be revealed as the God. Or some of you, okay? What about a child God? Why does it have to be a complete, all-perfect God? What about a God who just hasn't gotten everything perfect yet? And that would really explain the Republican Party, wouldn't it? So if you think about it, or what God could be gay and really, promotes gay sexual activity. So that heterosexual thing, that's to keep you guys going along, but the action is really where the homosexuals and lesbians are at. Which would, I guess, make him the queen of the universe, right? So there are many different ways you can define God. Why just choose one, right? And then what about the problem of choice and free will and evil in the world? I think that is something we have to consider. Mr. Hunt believes we can choose. I don't think that's possible if you define your God as being all-powerful and all-knowing. Then he brings you into the world already knowing what your entire life is going to be like, watching your life like a DVD. Or, I guess, Bluetooth now, right? So, what choice do you have in terms of resisting evil? Does this mean we have to be in the fear of dread that, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm destined to behave this way? Well, it seems like you have free will, but to an omniscient being, no. He knows everything you're going to do. He knows how many molecules of oxygen you're taking in and CO2 is going out. How many hairs are on your head and how many hairs you've lost over your lifetime. He knows that's what omniscience means. So when it comes to choosing good versus evil, let's think about that for a sec, right? There are two types of evil, clearly, at least, on this planet, right? There's moral evil, and that's the evil we do to each other. I decide to take over a country and kill some people and try to squander their natural resources. That's one type of evil. But what about natural evil? How do we explain that with an all-good God? What's the deal with that? Sure, I can understand the odd hurricane, I can understand the odd volcano, but why in 1999 did you have an earthquake kill 30,000 people in Pakistan, the majority of whom were Muslim? What was he trying to prove there when 13,000 of them turned out to be children under the age of 5? I miss that. Why? Like, clearly he could have stopped it. Clearly he knows the earthquake is going to happen. But he chose not to. And he caused incredible suffering to so many people throughout that time period. And all he had to do was that, and it wouldn't have happened. Thanks. If you think God has a plan, and that something's going on, and don't you worry about it. Yeah, some bad stuff's going to happen in your life, but in the end, it's all going to be worthwhile. I don't want to hear it, because the suffering of one child doesn't add up to all the goodness you think God has. And that kind of suffering is the type we have to stop as human beings first, before we start to pray and give up our lives to what I believe is an imaginary being. Thank you.
Okay, Dave. All right. Just before questions, closing remarks.
Okay. Okay, what he's just said about God, natural disasters, isn't that nature? I thought nature was running the show. How are we going to stop nature? Well, a good God, here's a child that falls over a cliff. Whoops, stop the law of gravity right now. There are certain things that have been set in motion by man's sin. I said this is not the universe or the world that God created. It's the world we created. It's a world that's in rebellion. Okay, now, free will. Christopher is a philosophy professor. Well, he surely knows that in philosophy there's been a lot of discussion about free will. My son happens to be a tenured philosophy professor as well. He's written a book or two about it. In fact, engaged in a debate with others. But we could go way back to 1780 when John Wesley preached a sermon on it. He said, foreknowledge is not the same as predestination. Because God knows something is going to happen, does not cause it to happen. God lives outside of time. What we think is past, present, and future, he sees it as one thing. He has given us the power of choice, but the fact that he's given us the power of choice does not cause us to make that choice. Now, he's given us really a parody of the Bible, of the Garden of Eden. He's turned it into a fairy tale, and he's given us some fairy tales. He talks about movies and Jaws and so forth. I don't think any of us, if you're a Christian, I don't know about the rest of you who are not Christians, I don't think we believe that God made that kind of a world, that it's a fantasy world. He says he made some robots. Well, I know he's giving an illustration. We don't believe that God made human beings robots, and that he programmed Adam and Eve. You maybe got that from, I don't know where, from Augustine or whatever, but that's not what Christians believe. I've written books about this. This is not biblical, in my opinion, when God said, don't touch that, don't eat, not touch, don't eat from that tree. I think it was the easiest command he could have given to Adam and Eve. There must have been thousands at least, maybe millions of trees of every variety in the garden. And God says you can eat of all of them, but just don't eat of this tree. I don't think there was anything special about that tree. The special point was God made a universe, and he should be in charge. You don't like it? You want to do it my way? God, get out of here. I'll run the universe the way I want it. Then you're a rebel. Now, I don't think God should just stand by and let that sort of thing happen. He has laws, and I think those laws should be obeyed. I forget the scientist. I could remember, but I don't have time to remember because my time is running out. He said there is a difference between natural laws that must be obeyed and moral laws that ought to be obeyed. Ought takes us outside of chemistry and physics. Now, Christopher believes in evolution. He's a materialist. Well, then how do we know? I mean, everything that he's thinking, it came from a big bang. And it's because of the antecedent motions of the atoms in his brain that all began with a big bang. And really, it means nothing at all. So maybe he only holds these ideas of atheism because he was programmed by evolution
20 seconds.
to do that. Well, we need another discussion, Christopher. There is too much to cover. He says we got a lot of homework to do. I think Christians have done a lot of homework, and I will stand by what the Bible teaches. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back. And following this section of question and answers, there is a presentation that will be put on here around 3 o'clock. So you can stay for that if you like. Okay, well, we'll start with Dr. diCarlo. And I don't think we're going to get through all these questions today, but I can type them up and email them to you both for your information. First one, how do you personally disentangle large T truth from small t truth when you assert that you are wrong and I am right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't say that large T truth, big T truth doesn't exist. In fact, I'm convinced it does. It's just a matter of the difficulty in determining when somebody knows something is absolutely certain. When I talk about the age of the earth, I say Mr. Hunt is wrong because of what appears to be an overwhelming amount of evidence regarding dating techniques of the age of the earth and those fossils that have been found on the earth and have been done over and over and over again by reputable sources. Do I think absolute truth exists? Sure. You want an example? Here's one. Some of you people in here believe that when you die, you somehow continue to exist. A soul or something continues on and you continue to exist. Some people here will believe that that is not the case, that when you die, you are gone forever and all time. Somebody's right, somebody's wrong. Somebody is in possession of absolute truth right now, but the problem is very difficult to demonstrate that, since we haven't really kind of gone on beyond and come back and said, oh, heaven's great, it's just a lack of chairs, but it's nice, you'll like it. We have no real evidence to convince, personally me, that I'm going to be going to some great beyond, but nonetheless, one of us is right, one of us is wrong, so absolute truth does exist. Small t truth is much easier to make determinations about, because you get a community of people who decide on what criteria needs to be satisfied in order to attain information in a responsible way. And that's what science prides itself on.
So what would be an example of a large T truth?
Just that one of us is going to be, some of us are going to be right that there is either an afterlife or there isn't an afterlife. The problem with that is we don't have criteria to be able to determine who's right.
Okay, so it's unknowable.
No, there may be some way unknown to us to be able to tap into that type of truth.
Okay, so it's unknown if it's unknown.
It's just unknowable
right
currently.
As the moderator, I don't think you're supposed to enter into this.
Here's your question, Dave. Here's your question. Have you ever read another book other than the Bible that proves the world is 6,000 years old? And if so, what is it?
Well, there are many out there, if you want to look it up, but I would just recommend one. It's called In 6 Days. 50 scientists from many different disciplines, astrophysicists, chemists, biochemists, geneticists, and so forth. They give their scientific evidence from their point of view of science that the world was created in 6 literal 24-hour days, and I think they do a very convincing job from a scientific standpoint, about within 10,000 years ago or whatever. So, but there are many books that have dealt with this, and they're not written by dummies. You get the impression that anybody that believes that, that fairy tale of the Garden of Eden, they must be really stupid. Well, some of the most intelligent people believe that.
Okay.
Have believed it and still do.
Thank you. Next question. What drives the atheist?
Atheist, yeah.
Atheist.
It'll become popular soon enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
To continue to exist. What's your hope?
My hope is that we can create a better world, really, and that we come up with a better system of morality, of politics, of compassion and care, some similar virtues that I'm sure Mr. Hunt and most of the people in this room would agree to. So I just don't need a God patting me on the back or believing that he's looking down saying, way to go, Chris, you did a good job with your boys, I got a nice comfy chair right beside me. I don't need that. I don't have time for that. I think it's more important to get on with the business of the day now.
All right. Dave, Mr. Hunt, you have given good evidence that there should be a God. However, how do you bridge the gap between should be and is? You have given scientific arguments for a creator. Where is your biblical evidence? Is the Bible a book of science?
The Bible doesn't pretend to be a book of science. It's not a book about theories. It says, in the beginning, God created. It tells you facts. Backed up, as I didn't have time to give them, hundreds of prophecies that came true. Thousands of years that prophesied specific, not vague prophecies, and I gave you just a very few examples. And when God says, I will tell you what's going to happen before it happens, and when it does, you will have to acknowledge, I'm God. Now, it's not because God caused it to happen. That's the whole thing about free will and foreknowledge and predestination. And there have been many books written about that. But the Bible gives you the evidence. And there it is. Okay, here's the difference between me and Christopher. I believe that the evidence, and God gives it to you, prophecy fulfilled is one of them. I believe that it points to a creator. I believe the scientific evidence points to a creator. Law of biogenesis points to a creator. Life only comes from life. All of the origin problems point to a creator. You can't come up with the origin without going to a creator. So, but does that mean that I understand everything about the universe and I understand how God created it or whatever? No, I don't, because I've got a peanut brain and some of the things are beyond my capacity to understand, and God himself can't even explain it to me at this point because I don't have the capacity. Okay? Well, I take, not a leap of faith. Christopher talked about a leap of faith. I do not believe in leaps of faith. I follow the evidence as far as I can understand it. It all points to God. So I take the next step, believing something that I cannot fully comprehend with my mind, and I accept it because it points to God, creation and so forth. I accept it because all the evidence points in that direction. Now Christopher has the same evidence that I have. He follows that evidence. Whoops! It points to God, like George Wald. Well, we're not going to let a divine foot in this door. We believe in, here we are, spontaneous generation. No, you already said it couldn't happen, okay? So Christopher follows the evidence as far as it goes, just like I do. It points to God. He takes a leap of faith in the other direction.
Okay.
That's an atheist.
All right, thank you. Okay, Mr. diCarlo, do you know for certain if anything exists outside of your own mind?
Do I know for certain if anything exists outside of my mind, other than the specious presence of my own mind and my own thoughts? No.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Hunt, is it God's intended creation to have, to date, 99% of all species that have ever gone extinct? In other words...
That's the end of the question?
Yeah, so is it God's intention to have 99% of the species go extinct?
Well, the evolutionists would tell you that that happened by natural selection. I don't believe that God is to blame for natural selection. But, you know, when you talk about all the disasters and a horrible world, there are certain laws that govern this world. But if you want to talk about wasted time, wasted lives, horror of death and destruction, go to evolution. Look at all the missing species that have been wiped out. Just had my eye didn't quite work, so I got wiped out. Natural selection wiped me out because it wouldn't help for my survival. I mean, billions, trillions. There ought to be trillions of these half-developed fossils out there, and they can't find one. But if you want to talk about really destruction, talk about evolution.
Okay. Here's a question for Christopher. What is a dream? Why do we have them? What's their purpose?
You're kidding.
He's a philosopher.
What is a dream? Pictures in your head when you're sleeping. Sometimes you can have a waking dream if you don't get enough sleep. So for all you truckers out there who are doing speed, knock it off and get some sleep. What is a dream? Why do we have them?
Yeah. What's their purpose?
What's the purpose of a dream? I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't know. Pinker maintains that they could be kind of excess baggage, the way your mind kind of coordinates your thoughts of the day. But I mean, you know, I've had some pretty bizarre dreams, and I have no idea what they mean. I don't know. How much time do we have? You could really, you know, Freud wrote volumes on this stuff, and in the end, they may mean absolutely nothing. They may have no significance whatsoever, or they could be different parts of reality and parallel universes that you're experiencing school without your pants on. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't possibly answer that.
Mr. Hunt, why is it wrong to think that matter and energy has existed forever? After all, if time was created at the same moment that the Big Bang was, then why would there be no time where matter and energy did not exist? So why is it wrong to think that matter and energy has existed forever?
Well, second law of thermodynamics, matter wears out. Everything wears out. The whole universe goes from order to disorder. Ultimately, it's all going to be disorder. I mean, read what the scientists say. I can quote you, let me just quote you one here. Cosmologist Edward Harris wrote, "Tens of billions of years pass in the growing darkness of a universe condemned to become a galactic graveyard." I could quote you other ones. We're getting towards absolute, I mean, all the stars are burned out. This is the heaven for the atheist, I guess. I don't know why they're working so hard. I don't know why Richard Dawkins is so concerned about getting us all converted to atheism, because what does it offer? Well, it's meaningless. Your thoughts are the result of a Big Bang. I mean, Christopher wants a better world, but that's like, I go to the racetrack and I bet on the same old nag every day that has never finished a race yet, can hardly stagger out of the starting gate. You'd begin to think that my common sense had failed me, that my loyalty to that horse was far greater than my common sense. I think Christopher and the humanists, or few that we have out here, betting on a dead horse. It never has won a race yet. You are betting on humans, and they have failed. Where do the wars come from? Because we did it. and now we are somehow going to work it out, and we're going to make a paradise out of this universe or world. I don't think it's in the cards. I think you've got an awful lot of faith to make a bet like that.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, would you have chosen to be born if given the choice? Please explain your decision.
Yes, given the choice, I'd rather be than not be, even if that means I'm apparently an old nag. I'd still like to be around. I am grateful for being alive. I just have no direction for gratitude. I can't say, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Allah, thank you, great soaring eagle. I can't, you know what I mean? I can't put my gratitude anywhere because I just don't have overwhelming or even partially convincing evidence. But I'd rather be than not be. And that includes after I die. But if that's not going to happen, then I'm going to try the best I can to upload my brain to a mainframe so I can attain immortality before I leave this world. Just remember what Woody Allen said. I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality by not dying. And I'm the same.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Hunt, why is it... Oh, sorry, here it is. If God could take the time thousands of years ago to punish wrongdoers, why could he not take time out of his busy schedule to help out 6 million people in 1939 to 45, or AIDS-ridden Africa, etc.?
Well, we do have the power of choice. It's not our karma, as the Hindu debated last night, or argued last night. Things happen because we make choices. One thing about time is you can't get it back. I mean, this today will be gone, and you can't do it over again. And we still make choices. I can quote you any number of atheists. Why? What is their problem? They hate God. And I'm not saying Christopher does, but Richard Dawkins surely does. Christopher Hitchens surely does. Awful lot of them out there, they hate God, and if they end up in hell, they've got no one to blame but themselves. They didn't want to be in heaven. They didn't want to submit to God. They didn't want to believe in God. They have the power of choice. All the evidence is there. So this is the way it is, and there are certain laws that govern the universe, and they're not going to be changed until one day God will create a new universe.
Okay. This is a longer one. Atheists say there is no God, no absolute truth, no way of knowing big T truth. Doesn't this mean that truth is relative? Good and evil are not absolutes, but are relative? What is good for one may not be good for another. Then what is your basis for trying to live as a good, compassionate person whose duty it is to find truth? Why be good? Why not have many sexual partners to ensure that your genes are passed on? Why not kill deformed babies? Why not euthanize developmentally delayed adult and so on who use up resources? My ultimate question, if there is no God, what is your morality based on?
My morality is based on reciprocal altruism. A Christian would call that the golden rule. You stole that from biology. You didn't come up with that, nor did Jesus. Reciprocal altruism is what goes around comes around. You help your family and yourself survive and reproduce. You help your extended family, your cousins. You extend that to your kin and your societies and communities in which you live. And in so doing, the more humans cooperate in this compatible way, the greater the good is served for all. It's when you go it alone, whether religiously or politically or morally, that you cut yourself off from others. And what happens is you create divisiveness. And as soon as you do that, it's us against them. And for some reason, some groups feel that they're better than others. Well, what my evolutionary theory tells me is that no matter who you are and where you think you came from, your ancestors all came from Africa, which means you are all the same. If you want equality for all, you better understand that we are all African, which means we all have to care for each other in exactly the same way. And that means the golden rule is the main idea behind how we should treat each other. But it comes from biology. It doesn't come from any religion. You'll see meerkats using reciprocal altruism, lemurs, chimpanzees, orangutans, ants, you name it, they're using it. Why? Because it serves the greater good. And I think what we all want in life are the same things. Freedom, security, lack of pain and discomfort, happiness and enjoyment. So that's what guides my morality, and that's what guides my life.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, how can I be sitting here about to die from cancer and know I am going to heaven without any doubt?
Well, that's a good question. My eldest daughter has incurable cancer. What is cancer? Cancer is a cell that is no longer following the DNA. Man is a cancer on this earth. We have said we're not going to follow what God wants us. We're not going to obey His laws. Now, cancer is a horrible disease. It can happen to anyone. How can you know you're going to go to heaven? Well, first of all, you're going to have to believe the Bible. I've given you some evidence. There's a whole lot more. I've got a book out there, Seeking and Finding God. There are plenty of books, been written plenty on the internet that would help you not just believe, take a leap, but have solid evidence that the Bible is true. Now, the Bible says, the Bible's not an ecumenical book. It doesn't say, take any road you want. It's okay. This is what the Hindu said last night. It doesn't really matter. We're all going to end up in the same place anyway. No, that's narrow-minded. They say there's only one destination, and I'm not going there. Jesus said there's two. Take your choice. Now, He said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Now, if He is who He claimed to be, He said He's the way, then what way did He say? He said He came to die for our sins, to pay the penalty that we ought to have because of God's justice, and He took that penalty. And if you would accept His payment of that penalty in your place, it would be credited to you that God would forgive you, but not just like a Barabbas, Barabbas could say, Jesus died in my place, and that set him free to go out and live his life. Paul said, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. There is a transformation of the life that comes into a person when they receive Christ. It's called being born again. And I can tell you, I think before I made that choice to receive Christ, I think I'd been in 1,000 fights. That was the end of my fighting right then. When I received Christ, invited Him into my heart, He changed me totally and completely. I've known many drug addicts, hardcore heroin addicts. Jesus changed them, delivered them. Nothing else would deliver them, and so forth. So anyway, I'm sure that there are people here who would, if you're really sincere in that desire, they would love to talk to you and try to explain more.
Thank you. Okay, Christopher, why did you leave your Roman Catholic faith? It must have taught you the difference from right and wrong in relationships.
Well, yeah, I was an altar boy for 5 years, and, I was interested in the religion at the time, and I knew a fair bit about it. And Vatican II had come in, so we had guitars in the church, and, I was a bit of a musician, and Jesus Christ Superstar had come out, and, that was pretty neat. And I'd even, at around age 10 or so, I talked to my mother, and I thought, the life of a priest is probably a good life, and it's one filled with devotion and compassion, and, she was very proud of me, and then puberty hit. And I couldn't handle the celibacy thing, so the Catholicism sort of went by the way in terms of my becoming a priest. But over time, I just started to see more and more contradictions, more and more problems with defining God as being omniscient and omnibenevolent, and then atrocities occurring. Trying to understand what a divine plan could possibly be. When you see infants dying of bone cancer, and what possible message does that bring, and why would he even bring people into the world only to suffer these horrible, horrible deaths? So really, I would say a series of what you would call crises of faith led to my eventual position. So by the time I was in high school, I had started to realize, no, I'm pretty convinced the Catholics don't have it right. So I would imagine all the Christians don't have it right. So then I looked at the other various religions, and then by the time I was in university, I started to learn more about reasoning and argumentation and world religions as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Hunt, you mentioned free choice. According to the Bible, how are we born in sin and have inherited punishment from Adam and Eve? I already have 1 foot in hell. How is this free choice? Jesus died for my sins, yet it only works if I believe it. How is this free choice?
Well, you have the choice of believing or not believing. You're saying, well, God dangles me over the flames of hell and says, do it my way, turn or burn, or I'll drop you in. No, that's not the way it is. I mean, look, if I offer you $1 million, which I can't, but supposing I did, you have the choice to accept it or reject it. God offers you heaven, in forgiveness of sins, to be in his presence forever in inexpressible joy for eternity. Now, I don't think he's forcing anything on anybody. You have the free choice. You can accept it or reject it. Now, you were born in sin, shapen in iniquity, yes, because we didn't inherit perfection from Adam and Eve. We inherited a tendency to take our own way. That's what we inherited. That's what original sin is. Adam and Eve chose that. And all of their descendants suffer the consequences because we inherit this sin that they made the choice. And ultimately, you begin to inherit diseases and many other problems that arise out of this free choice. God he has a solution to that, repentance and faith in Christ and a home in heaven, but you don't have to take it.
Okay. Christopher, please clarify your reference to the difference between secular and Christian values.
It depends on what type of values we're talking about. They can be identical. So if I care for my fellow man in a compassionate way and I want to stop suffering where I see it and when it's possible, and you as Christians do the same thing, then our motivations are a little bit different. I do it for non-religious or for secular reasons, and you would do it for religious reasons because your God has said, this is the way I'd like you to behave. So the end game, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference really in terms of the effect. That's why I'm tolerant of world religions, provided that through your beliefs, as long as you're making the world a better place, you're not harming people, you're not psychologically damaging them in any ways. I don't have as big a problem with religious belief as Dawkins does, because there is, I know, of having been raised Roman Catholic, that there is genuine goodness that comes from the hearts of people who are religious. So I'm not denying that. I'm saying I can be just as good without any God or without any divine purpose whatsoever. And I think the important thing to realize is the end game is the most important thing. If you're doing good and you're a genuinely good person, like I said, I don't care what you believe in, you just can't harm others through your belief.
Right. We'll take maybe 2 questions each and then we'll conclude. Mr. Hunt, was Jesus half man and half God, or all man and all God? As the Son of God, did Mary contribute 23 chromosomes and God the other 23? Or did God miraculously create the other 23 chromosomes? Is God a man? If God created the other 23 chromosomes, how does that make Jesus any different than the rest of God's creation? Who died on the cross? God, the man, or God, the God, or both?
Well, the Bible says God is not a man that he should boast. Jesus is not a hybrid. He's not half man and half God. He is God. When you're God, if you're God, you can never cease to be God. He became a man. The scripture says, "A body hast thou prepared me." A body for Christ was prepared in the womb of a virgin, just as Adam was created fresh by the hand of God out of the dust of the ground. How he did that, and what about the chromosomes? The chromosomes has nothing to do with God. We have to distinguish between the body that we live in, even, is not our soul and our spirit, and the body that Jesus lived in, a perfect, sinless man. That's not God. That's not God. That's not the soul and the spirit of Jesus. So it's it's not an unanswerable question, but it's very difficult for us to understand. How can God be a man and still God? How can Jesus say on the cross, "Father, forgive them"? How can he talk to his Father? Is he talking to himself? No. The Trinity is, I explained it last night, the essentiality of it. It's absolutely necessary. It's the only, give me another minute here. We have three possibilities. We have one single being. God is a single being, Allah, or Jehovah of the Jews. He has a problem. He has unity, but he has no diversity. Before he created other creatures, no one to love, no one to fellowship with, no one to commune with. He's incomplete. On the other end, you have polytheism. You got a bunch of gods, but they fight one another. You got diversity and no unity. The Bible very clearly teaches the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God existed eternally in three persons, not three gods. The Father loves the Son, and so forth, complete in themselves with both unity and diversity.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. diCarlo, what happens if you're wrong about God and about man, about the world's problem, and how to solve the world's problem as laid out in the Bible, and then you die?
Oh, so this assumes that a Christian God does exist? Yeah, so what if I'm wrong?
What happens if you're wrong?
Right. I think if he's as good a God as you folks invent him to be, then he's going to say, "Welcome home, dude. Nice to see you used your brain rather than following me like a bunch of silly sheep."
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hunt, why should we believe, and this will be the last question, I see we're past 3, and then we'll give Christopher one more. Why should we believe the Bible when it has been edited and interpreted different ways many times?
Well, first of all, that's nonsense. It has not been edited and interpreted many times. Now, some people say, well, you can make the Bible say anything you want. Well, if you can get anything out of the Bible that you want, it must be the most amazing book in the world. You can read a sentence and make it say 2 different contradictory things? I don't think so. A language has structure. It has meaning. We use it in court of law. We write contracts and so forth. But then suddenly the Bible? Oh, well, you don't know what it's saying. Been re-edited and so forth. Absolutely not. It's a whole study of the manuscripts. We have 25,000 approximately manuscripts or partial manuscripts for the New Testament. I could quote you Robert Wilson. He was fluent in over 40 Semitic languages. He examined every page, every letter. 40 years it took him of the Old Testament. He said, I can testify to you there is not one page of the Bible that you can be in doubt about. Anybody that says, I want to know the reasons. Okay, so you got a lot of people, oh, well, the Bible, it's not reliable and so forth. No, it's not true.
All right. Christopher, what is your opinion regarding the fact that 100 million people died in the 20th century at the hands of 2 atheistic ideologies, those being Nazism and communism.
Yeah. Blame the atheists for World War II, right? I mean, that's a cheap shot, and again, that's called a straw man argument. Atheism never created Stalin, never created Hitler. Hitler was a Roman Catholic, first of all. So if you think about it, atheism never went that way. Secondly, science, you have to consider, is like a knife. It's neutral. You can butter your bread with it. You can cut a watermelon with it. Or you could kill somebody with it. Okay. If Darwin put out some amazing ideas that demonstrated that there's natural selection rather than divine providence or selection on this planet, he gives that freely to the world as neutral. If some moron wants to take that and to justify his actions by misreading it in what's known as social Darwinism, that since we're humans and we are the fittest and we are the Aryan race, we have the right to keep everyone down, that's Hitler's problem, not Darwin's nor science's. That is a political stand that has nothing to do with the neutrality of science. And we need to be aware of that. Atheism had nothing to do with it.
All right. Well, I want to thank and congratulate our speakers today for keeping to the rules and their cordial and lively and open debate. And we thank you for coming. And there is a DVD being made. It's available for this. Let's give our speakers a big hand.